Hey everyone, this is Pete. Have you ever seen a game sitting there on the shelf of a shop, and you look at it, and you know it's probably going to be terrible, and yet you still really want to play it anyway? That was me with Davilex's M25 Racer, a PC game originally released in 1999. For the benefit of my overseas viewers, the M25 is a major road in the UK that almost completely encircles the Greater London area. It's considered to be one of the most important roads in the country due to its status as a gateway to London itself, and at 117 miles long it's effectively the longest ring road in the country. As a circular route, albeit a very long one, you might think that would make it an ideal venue for some high-speed racing. However, you would be wrong, as the M25 is also notorious for being one of the busiest roads in the country, frequently slowing to a complete standstill for no apparent reason for hours at a time. And no amount of road widening which the powers that be have implemented over the years appears to have helped with this issue. Present estimates indicate that by 2050 the M25 will have been widened enough to completely consume the town of Watford, and yet it would still suffer traffic jams approximately every 3.5 miles, turning what should be an hour-long journey into an odyssey that takes the best part of a day, or more. In fact, the M25 is so notoriously horrible to drive on that some people outright refuse to use it wherever possible. Circa 1999, I was in that position. I was able to drive, but the prospect of driving on the M25 was completely out of the question for me. I was absolutely terrified of even considering it, with the only driving related thing I was even more fearful of being driving inside London itself. Of course, once I left home, I discovered that if you live in certain places in the country, the M25 is literally the only way you can get from one place to another, outside of attempting to pick your way through country roads and busy town centres, and thus it's something that most drivers have to get used to at one point or another. As someone who lives on the south coast of the UK, and whose workplace and parents are both located around the East Anglia region, I have to use the M25 anytime I want to get to either of those places. And it didn't take me long to discover that the M25 wasn't really scary. It was just really annoying. But the idea of M25 Racer still appealed to me somewhat. What if you could live in a fantasy world where it was in fact possible to race around the M25 uninterrupted? That actually sounded like it could be quite fun. And as such, the game remained on my mind for quite some time, though for one reason or another I never picked it up. Probably because I was at an age where I felt like the people around me would judge me harshly for buying something that would so obviously be a complete pile of cack. I discovered in more recent years, specifically this year, that M25 Racer was actually ported, tweaked a bit and released on PlayStation as London Racer, another game which I had seen on store shelves, thought I would quite enjoy, but had held off on buying due to the potential embarrassment it would cause. I'm older and wiser now, and know that your own gaming tastes are nobody's business but your own, and thus nothing worth getting embarrassed over, so I finally decided to give London Racer a go for myself. And you know what I found? London Racer is kind of shit, but it's also kind of great. It's got this delightfully low-budget, janky charm to it that very much appeals to me these days. It's the kind of game where the jank factor doesn't get in the way of gameplay, but instead makes the whole experience something that makes you smile. Whether it's the numerous uncorrected misspellings that are the result of a hasty translation from the game's original Dutch, the fact that the bendy textures and visible seaming in the levels make the whole thing look like it's held together with cardboard and sticky tape, or the hilariously predictable behaviour of the in-game police force. In London Racer, you take on the role of a street racer who is involved in a tournament against 3 other anonymous opponents. Starting with a humble NIM-E, it's your job to battle your way through a series of stages, earning money along the way to upgrade your car and perhaps purchase some new vehicles, and ultimately prove that you are the most British street racer that there ever was. Your journey begins, as the game's original title suggests, on the M25. The loading screen map suggests that you start somewhere near the Millennium Dome, but it's nowhere to be seen on screen. Not surprising, since the real dome is nowhere near the M25, instead being situated in Greenwich. Aside from this factual error, the M25 stage actually provides a reasonably convincing interpretation of a British motorway, albeit with the M25's iconic traffic jams nowhere to be seen. Since you start in the relatively slow Nee-naw car, you'll likely find that as you race along the M25, you'll see police patrols, but they won't interfere with you. This is because the speed limit on motorways in the UK is 70 miles per hour, but in the Nee-naw, you'll likely struggle to break 50 at the best of times. This means that you can focus on racing, which is fairly straightforward thanks to the width of the road throughout the majority of the course. You will likely run into one of London Racer's main issues on this first stage, however, which is its abundance of invisible walls. Numerous tracks feature sections that look like they should provide alternative routes or shortcuts, but if you attempt to drive down them, you'll simply find yourself slamming into an invisible barrier. This can be exceedingly annoying, particularly when, as on the M25 course, they occur rather close to the finish line. The game features some extraordinary rubber banding which both you and your opponents can take advantage of, and when you suffer a mishap like this so close to the goal, you're probably not going to recover from it. It doesn't matter too much though, because there are no real consequences for losing in London Racer, other than the fact you'll get a little less in the way of prize money. You'll still get something just for participating, and this becomes even less of an issue as you progress through the game, as we'll discuss shortly. Between races, you have the opportunity to spend your winnings on both repairing any damage to your car and installing some upgrades. These include a turbo boost, better tyres, new brakes, an improved engine and a better gearbox. It's not hard to max out the initial Nee-naw, particularly since you have a small budget to start with before even the first race, and get it into a position where it's surprisingly competitive against its opponents. Next up, it's into London proper for a circuit race. This is where the good aspects of the game really start to shine, as you'll see that despite the overall jankiness of the graphics engine, which was nothing unusual for PlayStation games of this era, it must be said, the actual visuals themselves look quite good, and certainly pretty convincing for a 32-bit console's polygonal interpretation of central London. This race is a nice contrast to the relative blandness of the initial M25 course, and is more in line with what the rest of the game offers. You'll likely find that it's this London race where you first encounter some of the game's other mechanics. Most notably, it's probably the first time you'll hear a sound that you'll be hearing a lot during your time with London Racer. Yes, it's the Popo, the rozzers, the old Bill. If you're speeding when you pass a parked police car in any course, it will give chase, and their cars are inevitably faster than yours. Their behaviour is, as previously mentioned, pretty predictable though. More often than not, they'll try and overtake you, then skid sideways in an attempt to block your path. Stay well out of their way as they pass you, and you can dodge them with ease, but get caught by the fuzz and you'll find yourself on the receiving end of a warning. 3 warnings and you're disqualified from the race. Again, there's no real major consequences to this, as you can just try again. The other thing you'll find on the London course is Gatso speed cameras, which has been a controversial addition to the UK's roads ever since their introduction in the early 90s. Since the state of the M25 in London Racer already makes it clear that we're in the realm of pure fantasy, you can of course simply smash them down with no repercussions. In fact, you get rewarded for it, £2,000 per camera to be exact, which means you can supplement your prize money considerably if you learn where all the cameras are and take them out as you progress around the course. If you miss them, you do get a speeding fine, but the amount this costs you is pretty negligible when taking the other opportunities to earn money into account. So on your first few trips out, it's best to use the camera flashes to work out where they are, then obliterate them without mercy on a subsequent lap. The other thing you'll likely spot for the first time in the London course is a petrol station. Pull into this, or rather attempt to scream through it at high speed, and all damage on your car will immediately be repaired, and if you have a turbo fitted, it'll be refilled. It's near essential to take advantage of this on each race, as it's very difficult to avoid taking damage, and if you can keep from being bumped around too much on the last stretch of the race, you can save yourself a lot of money on repair fees. After your jaunt around central London, it's time to take a trip out into the great British countryside, on a course that is supposed to represent a point-to-point race taking you from London to Oxford, but which is actually just a single lap race that both starts and finishes in Oxford, proceeding through the surrounding countryside for its majority. This is a nice change of pace from the urban racing of the previous course. The narrower roads make for a bit of a tricky drive, and there are once again a couple of places where the invisible walls can play havoc with your efforts, particularly since the single lap nature of this race makes it hard to catch up in time after an accident, but for the most part it's a pleasant drive. Once again, despite the wobbly nature of the visuals, the actual atmosphere of this stage is spot on for driving on British country roads. The overall look and feel of the stage is excellent, from the historic buildings of Oxford at the start and finish line to the rolling fields, lush greenery and quaint villages you find yourself driving past as the course progresses. Even with the abundant pop-up in evidence, London Racer is actually a reasonably nice looking game considering its host platform. The main flaw in this course, and a similar one later in the game, comes in the implementation of the speed cameras. Here they're typically placed on grass verges that you're not actually able to drive on, making them extraordinarily difficult to hit. It is still possible, but you tend to do so by clipping the verge at just the right point rather than simply slamming through the camera directly. It's not especially intuitive and it's kind of more trouble than it's worth. If you earned enough to buy a new car in the previous race, you'll run into London Racer's biggest balance issue. The fact that if you have a car better than the default Nee-naw, you'll get an enormous cash bonus after each race that tends to outstrip the prize money, even if you come in first place. And that bonus only gets bigger with each new car you purchase. In theory, the big bonus is meant to help absorb the increased repair cost that the better cars have, but in practice it just means that you can quickly earn more money than you'll ever need, making the actual racing side of things almost completely pointless. So long as you don't wreck your car or get arrested, you can safely finish a race in 4th place and still get a substantial cash injection. Next up, it's into Oxford proper for probably London Racer's trickiest course. Once again, the overall visual design of the course is great, with the cobbled streets and historic buildings really looking surprisingly authentic for a game of the era. The trouble with this particular course is that it's so damn narrow. As anyone who's ever driven around Oxford in real life will know, this is also very authentic to the real thing, but it doesn't feel like it makes for super fun racing at first glance. In practice, what you need to do on the Oxford course is change up your strategy a bit. This is, for the most part, not a course where you can put your foot to the floor and just charge straight for the finish line. Instead, the sharp corners and narrow roads mean you'll actually need to brake and steer carefully. Once you get a feel for it, the change in feel makes for a surprisingly fun experience, though be prepared for some frustration on your first few attempts.
This is your first warning.
Once again though, you'll likely find that the bonus you get for completing the course, particularly if you knock down plenty of speed cameras along the way, is well in excess of even the prize for finishing in first place, meaning that you'll probably be able to afford another new car for the return journey to London, which in turn will result in even bigger cash bonuses regardless of finishing position. Speaking of that return journey, it's another single lap race pretending to be a point-to-point race, this time taking you through the Wiltshire countryside, past some pleasing landmarks such as an authentic looking medieval church, some rustic farmhouses and even Stonehenge. The just after sunset look of this course makes for a pleasing overall vibe, as if you just had a fun day of racing across the country and are now on your way home to the capital for a nice curry and a few pints. Also, you can drive right over the middle of a roundabout. The main criticism of this course is that it simply doesn't feel like you're arriving back in London by the time it concludes. Instead, the finish line is simply in a rather nondescript location that makes it feel like you haven't really gone anywhere. While the route that was supposedly to Oxford was just an illusion rather than an actual point-to-point race, it was still fun to conclude the event by coming back into a recognisable urban landscape. Nothing like that here, sadly. The next race takes us back into London for the Park and Palace course, which is a more high-speed course with nice wide roads for the most part, though there are a few obstacles along the way that you'll need to pay attention to, as well as the usual gazzos and police patrols. Amusingly, the course designer seemingly forgot to put the petrol pump models in this course, so the area where you can repair your car and refuel your turbo is just a rather nondescript alcove in the front of a building, though the course does at least give you some advance notice of it with some illuminated signs. If you're familiar with how the game works by this point, and you likely will be, you'll know what to look out for. Park and Palace is quite a fun course that features some recognisable London landmarks along the way, and its wide streets make for blessed relief after the claustrophobia of Oxford and the narrow country roads. We are of course once again in the realms of pure fantasy, since you'd never be able to drive at these speeds in the real London, but it's nice to be able to enjoy the capital in a way that is simply impossible to in reality. There is one rather major annoyance in this course, mind. The fact that one of London Racer's invisible walls actually appears to extend partly over the road almost immediately before the finishing line. This can make for an immensely frustrating experience, as I'm sure you can imagine, though once you know it's there you can take steps to avoid it. Keep left, is all I'll say. For some reason, the penultimate course takes us back to the M25 for the exact same course as earlier, only at a different time of day. By this point in the game, you'll likely have a car that is fast enough to trigger the police patrols and speed cameras, making for a slightly different experience. And of course, you'll still have to watch out for the invisible walls. It's mostly exactly the same though. The different time of day is mostly a change in colour palette and skybox. It would have perhaps been nice to see a different stretch of the M25, or perhaps race the previous route in reverse, but no, this is what we got. The grand finale of London Racer takes us back into central London once again for the Thames course. This one unfolds with a pleasing early evening sort of vibe to it, which makes it nicely distinct from the other courses, and the scenery is once again authentic feeling and fun to play Spot the Landmark with. Of particular note is the London Bridge rail and underground station that marks the start and finish line. Unlike most other brands in the game which have been tweaked so as not to infringe their copyright, this stands out by having the authentic British Rail and London Underground logos on it, making it look particularly convincing. And after all that, this. You win. You are the winniner of all. That's it. That's the entire game. Well, actually, I tell a lie. Once you've firmly established yourself as the winniner of all, you can then go back and do it all again. Except there's probably no real reason to, since you've likely unlocked the best car and all its upgrades by this point, if you have the slightest bit of skill in racing games. There's no time trial mode, no single race mode where you can pick a course, just those same courses in order, over and over again, with no unlockable rewards for successfully completing the championship. And you know what? I'm not angry about that. The entirety of London Racer can be played through in the space of less than an hour, and I actually think that's kind of great, because it means you can come back and replay the whole thing whenever you feel like, arcade game style. It's not a game that demands a long-term commitment. It simply knows exactly what it is, and it provides nothing more or less than that which it was designed to be. Would it be nice to have some sort of incentive to replay? Sure. The original PC version apparently had 3 classes of cars to race, but this feature is absent from the PlayStation port. Some sort of mirror or reverse mode would be welcome also, as would some additional cars, even if they were silly comedy cars rather than ones which are practical to use. And the lack of ability to run time trials or run single races on a specific course is an odd omission, though one I don't find myself missing as much as I thought I might. London Racer is a janky, unbalanced mess of a game with tons of annoying little niggles that will likely put some people off. But not only do I feel like I would have genuinely enjoyed this game back in the day, regardless of any embarrassment friends might have attempted to make me feel for purchasing such obvious bargain bin software, I've legitimately had fun with it now in 2023. And you know what? I don't think the recording of the footage for this video will be the last time I play London Racer either. Although I've got a big pile of sequels to explore first, so watch out for those soon. For now though, I'll just say, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.